work with the nations of the world on our own soil.
Bem-vindos à Sociedade das Nações, um programa semanal sobre a atualidade internacional aqui na SIC Notícias. No mês passado, os chineses ganharam uma nova liderança. Foi remodelada toda a liderança do Partido Comunista. Há uns novos dirigentes que são, por agora, ainda relativamente desconhecidos. O nosso convidado desta semana, o professor Pan Wei, é professor universitário da Universidade de Beijing, é economista e é também pensador político e vai ajudar-nos a tentar decifrar um bocadinho o que é que podemos esperar desta nova China. Professor, welcome to the program. First of all, new leadership in China, in the party. What can we expect of this new leadership? Where is China going?
I think China is going to solve three major problems, or the people expect the leaders to solve three major problems. Number one is that some party government leaders, they got a rich family, and in China's political culture, if the family is rich, or because of the power they get rich, and that's very unacceptable. That is, political power cannot be combined with wealth, personal wealth. And the second is about the gap between the rich and poor. And people are not very familiar with this and would not get used to this. People would say here the sense of relative deprivation would make us unhappy. And the third is to maintain the high-speed growth, at least 7 point something, so that the Communist Party's promise of catching up with the living standard of the developed countries by 30-some years later, by 2049, would deliver. That is to say, the Communist Party needs to keep its promise so that we would meet our so-called pride.
You've been known in China for talking about something that I find very interesting, which is the need to have new political slogans and new political words, to designate things. For instance, you've been proposing a new word for the Occident, which is meritocracy. Okay, so people should go to higher spheres of power based not on wealth, not on your birth, but based on your merits. And they should be examined and they should be reviewed. Do you think that meritocracy is functioning in China?
Well, it has been a Chinese tradition for more than 2,000 years. It's a major principle for getting government officials promoted. Or let's say this, meritocracy means in China, an official getting to the rank, get into the team of government through examination. By examination grade, and then get promotions through evaluations. That is, examinations plus evaluations of performance. So promotion through performance evaluations. It has been for a long, long time, but it's a principle. Principle should not be mixed up with the facts, with the reality. That is, always power is corrupted by money and by clientelist ties, patron-client relationships.
And then another thing you've been insisting is that perhaps the notion of democracy in China, Mao-style democracy, older-style democracy, new-style democracy, should be based maybe on principles that in the West are seen in a different view. For instance, let's start by the relations between democracy as power to the people and the rule of law, the separation of powers and the possibility of reviewing decisions. What is working in China? Is it rule of law? Is it democracy as power to the people?
Okay.
What is working?
Let me say this. And rule of law in China, in the West, we got these two concepts, rule of law and rule by law.
Yes.
A king rule by law or a rule of law. But actually, the law cannot rule. Laws are made by people and enforced by a person.
But they exist even after people die, right?
And then we might also say in Chinese culture, because of the long tradition of small-scale farming, and Chinese people are the least law-abiding people, rule-abiding people. And but now this is a time for manufacture. This is a time for urbanization, and in cities, people have to abide by laws. So law, actually, rule of law in China means law enforcement, a stricter law enforcement. That's one thing. Okay, and another one is about democracy, or understood in the West, it's pretty much like electoral democracy. In the principle, or with the principle, or under the principle of majoritarian rule. If the society is divided, you get a strong social group, or some strong social groups, such as trade unions, and to govern, then your government can exist. But the point in China, the problem is that the society is undifferentiated. It has not been a class society. And no rich family in China has ever survived for more than 3 generations. So we don't have a noble class. We never had one. And so that problem made the society is very mobile or liquid. And people have a very strong sense of equality. Without a need of a social revolution, people have already become very equal. So that's very different from, say, Southern European countries.
President Xi Jinping, along with, I think, 4 other members of the New Standing Committee, are people who everybody expected to become leaders of China. They come from families which are related in the past to Mao Zedong. It's their birthright almost to have power, as they do now in China.
You don't agree with that?
Yeah, that's not necessarily so.
Well, that's what happened. I mean, they are now on the Standing Committee, aren't they, all of them?
Not all of them are from the revolutionary veterans family. That's not true.
4 of them, out of 7.
Well, out of 7, 4 of them, it really depends on how. For example, they married their daughter.
Yes.
Okay. By themselves, their parents are not.
Right.
Okay. And also, this is a transitional kind of a cabinet, if you understand this 7. And we got top 2, and at least our premier, or designated premier, and it's not from a prominent family. And just like before, like Hu Jintao and Wen Jiabao, both of them are from average families.
Yes.
And so this 4, and some people would say, oh, they're princelings. Number 1, their parents are not princes.
No, so
they're not princelings.
It's an expression which is used.
Yeah.
I understand
and
that, of course.
Also, no, I mean, their parents are from farmers, from very poor, average families.
Yes, but then they became very powerful by linking to
after
the revolution.
Yes.
Yeah. Of course.
And then I would say those 4 you named after actually are going to leave and in 5 years because of the age limit. So from that, you can see the meritocracy part of that. It's not just the patron-client or family linkage.
But
that's certainly not true.
But then why was there such a scandal when an American newspaper printed a story about possible business connections of some of the ruling circles? I'm not going to call it classes or elites, ruling circles. In China, there was a printed story in the American newspaper, and it was considered by certain Chinese sources as a provocation, as something
it was blacked out. It was blacked out.
Why is it so sensitive? And because we usually discuss the wealth and the scandals of wealth of our politicians.
And in China, the political tradition is that it cannot combine the wealth and power. And therefore, if a top leader, one of the top leaders' family is rich, no matter how they get rich, and this is from a rich family, they're not supposed to be the leaders, political leaders. So that is the Chinese kind of a political culture, and not to mention that if this family get rich during their relative is in power, in political power, that's not acceptable.
But then what
and
was?
So that's they need to black out this.
Oh, okay. So I understand your point of view. So they didn't like the. But if you would be a printer, if you would be an editor in China, would you print that story in China or not?
Probably I will. But in China, to criticize the very top leaders, and particularly the standing members of Politburo is very sensitive. They don't want the media to spread rumors because China has a lot of enemies, and so they would say that the hostile media would like to spread rumors and to make people distrust our government and so on. So with that kind of excuse, and they do that. And also, like in Singapore, they used to have that kind of thing. And if you criticize the top leader, and then they are going to black out you or even put you on lawsuit. And I think Britain also had that kind of a tradition. And in Hong Kong, there was a law. You can criticize everybody, but not criticizing the British Queen. And also, you cannot praise the Communist Party. That was the old Hong Kong kind of a...
Can we just shift the conversation a little bit? Xi Jinping also was appointed head of the army, which is unusual, isn't it, for that to happen simultaneously as he was appointed?
Yeah, usually 2 years later.
Yeah, it takes a little bit of time.
And this time they set a precedence and...
I'd like your interpretation of this precedent. Does this mean that the armed forces in China have become more important than they were before? What is the political explanation for this precedent, do you think?
Okay. Actually, this system started with Deng Xiaoping. And Deng Xiaoping, when he retired, he kept a position of military commission chairman. And in order to guarantee that Jiang Zemin could smoothly govern and without trouble, because military or senior revolutionary leaders, and only Deng Xiaoping could probably control them. And China has a very separate system. I mean, military is an independent armed group. And political leaders usually do not intervene into the military affairs, into it, and not civilian leadership. And then Jiang Zemin did the same to protect Hu Jintao's kind of a kind of a cradle power, so I'm guaranteeing you. And but this thing this practice has got a problem, and it seems that the power in China in recent 10 years is too divided. So the 9 members each has a responsibility for a certain sector of the state affairs. And this time they really want to take the lesson. They want the power to be somewhat concentrated. So they reduced, number one, they reduced the number of standing members of Politburo from 9 to 7. And second is that to give the General Secretary also the military power to symbolize that he has everything.
But you see, this coincides, doesn't it, with this problem that China is having now on the South China Sea with a lot of its neighbors. We've heard that China now has an aircraft carrier. Some weeks ago, they landed a plane on the aircraft carrier. So to a certain extent, what you're getting is an image of China starting to project its military power outside the borders of China, obviously, and it's inevitably you link that to the chairman of the country.
Okay, and it seems that China is having a growing military power. That's true. And actually, Deng Xiaoping in early 1980s, made a very significant decision to say that let's freeze the military expenditure and just focus on economic construction, because he said, I foresee that the world will be in peace for another 30 years or so, and there is no need to develop this kind of military affairs. But 3 things stimulated China. Number one is the first Gulf War. This war became so advanced, precise missiles, and to save Kuwait, and it gives China a sight that we are so behind, we're so backward, but that's still not enough. And then came the Li Denghui Taiwan, then the Taiwan president's visit to the U.S., and U.S. accepted him and violating our agreement. And so they said, well, Taiwan independence is our big problem because the U.S. backing up. And the third event in 1999 was even more serious. That is bombing of Chinese embassy in Yugoslavia. It's not a mistaken. It's intentional. Everyone knows that.
Since Mao Zedong arrived to power, China never involved itself into an international war, with the exception of Korea, indirectly, Vietnam, when your military operation was not very successful, some border skirmishes with the Soviet Union. Mm-hmm. In what cases do you think the Chinese military and the state are prepared to intervene in a large conflict outside of its borders?
I don't think there is a preparation. It's a deterrence.
No, but in what circumstances you think that would be justified?
In no circumstance, I would say Chinese want to intervene. And people now can envision that probably Chinese citizens in Libya, in Syria, and then
to rescue citizens.
Yeah, just to rescue citizens. And some people would say, hey, you should why you need to intervene in that way? You should directly intervene into their governments. But then I think the Chinese won't do that. But the point is that people pay a lot of attention to the naval power. Actually, the 18th Party Congress political report has actually made a decision that China would become a sea power.
Yes, blue water power. Yes.
Yeah, a blue water, an ocean strong country, that is to say.
Hence the aircraft carrier.
And then aircraft carrier is not that significant, I would say. It's a backward kind of equipment.
But the three that are proposed are advanced.
And let's say Portugal has one, right?
No.
Or Spain.
Spain has a small one.
Yeah, has a small one. And China has a small one. I mean, actually, it's an old shell and from the...
But that's a start.
You say that, Professor, but at the same time, there is very uncomfortable tension between you and South Korea and Japan and the Philippines. I mean, a number of countries are now, as you know, there is tension between them and China because of some of these unmanned islands in the South China Sea. Yeah. It's a reality. It exists at the moment.
Yeah. I think it's partially, if we think about that, China had land disputes in borders with all the neighbors, and now we have settled all of them except with India. And then so the water disputes is relatively new. It's because of the UN, or enforcement of this UN maritime law, which offers that if you own an island and then you have the right to a very large water territory. And so that all of a sudden becomes a dispute. And also because of the technology development that people now can get resources from the deep water, natural gas, oil, and minerals. And so there is an economic interest dispute.
Of course.
And then there is another factor, that's America's new pivot policy towards Asia, and then other Asian countries see the chances and started provoking this issue. Before we all agreed, let's put off this issue, disputes, to unlimited future. And let's start with the exploitation.
Can I just finish with one thing, because people will not forgive us if we don't touch it. You are a country with lots of ethnic minorities, but the two that have been stressed now is the one in Xinjiang, the Uyghur, and the ones in Tibet. What do you think is going to be the policy of the new group in power towards, for instance, Tibet? Because, as you know, Hu Jintao in Tibet, in the time of Deng Xiaoping, was seen as someone that repressed Tibet. Do you think that Mr. Xi Jinping is going to be much more open and liberal towards the Tibetan question?
Well, Tibetan question is not about liberal or tough policies. And
I can use other words.
Neither, and it's more complicated than that. Yes. With the international context of awakening of the religious and ethnic consciousness, and with external forces to help. So in Xinjiang, it has more to do with militant Muslims and fundamentalists. And in Tibet, it's another story. The Tibetan story is also complicated with some external forces in it. But I would say the main problem is that this regime, the Han Chinese regime, has a trouble to deal with spiritual civilization. And both of the Muslims in Xinjiang and Tibet, and also the monks in Tibet, Tibetan people have no problem with China, with Han Chinese. The monks, only monks. So many people don't know this. But in Xinjiang, it's about common people, and it's about religion's difference. And so I think for a materialistic, non-religious civilization in mainland China, to deal with the spiritual civilization and with the rising, awakening consciousness of spirituality, is some new challenge for the government to understand.
And it would be an interesting topic of conversation, which we unfortunately don't have time for this time, Professor. Maybe the next time you come to Lisbon. Thank you very much for being with us. It was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
My pleasure. Yeah.
E continuamos aqui na Fundação Gulbenkian, em Lisboa, para a segunda e última parte deste programa, os livros.
Verdade. Olha, voltamos para esta coleção das rainhas de Portugal que
Nunca
ameaça
mais
continuar,
acabam,
não. Pá, foram muitas.
Devem ter sido, pelos vistos.
Estamos a falar de 8 séculos de rainhas, que é uma coisa impressionante.
São muitas rainhas.
São muitas rainhas. Isto é sobre a primeira. Quer dizer, a primeira, antes da primeira, porque isto ainda é antes de Portugal ter nascido. Isto ainda é Portugal como condado portugalense. A rainha Dona Teresa, mãe de Dom Afonso Henriques, a Condessa Rainha. Um livro, mais uma vez, muito bonito, muito bem ilustrado, com boa documentação. Quais são as dores de parto de um condado que se quer transformar em Estado? Numa Europa uma Europa ainda voltada para o feudalismo e para as guerras entre reinos. De repente há este pequeno reino que decide, através do filho desta senhora, revoltar-se contra a mãe e tornar um condado-estado.
E vê lá os problemas que ele arranjou com isso.
A Condessa Rainha, Dona Teresa, no Círculo de Leitores, muito bonito. Os nossos amigos franceses podem perguntar, mas os portugueses não deixam de comemorar as invasões francesas, porque já andamos a comemorar o triunfo português e inglês sobre os franceses já há 2 anos ou 3 anos. Isto é do David Bottery, a primeira invasão de Portugal, portanto do Junot, Wellington contra Junot, 1807-1808.
Um ano só.
Um ano, não correu muito bem para os franceses, mas devastou Portugal. Foi terrível.
Muito bem para o Wellington.
Para o Wellington correu bem, mas não correu bem foi para Portugal. Ficou devastado, ficou miserável, ficou destruído. Ainda há muita coisa portuguesa que ainda está em casas francesas e museus franceses. E depois os ingleses, como sabes, também, a propósito da libertação, também puseram um bocadinho.
Também ajudam.
Também ajudaram. A primeira invasão de Portugal, Wellington contra o Junot, do David Bottery. Depois, um livro que vais gostar muito é do Imran Hamad. O Imran Hamad é um paquistanês que se tornou conhecido, tornou-se um socialite, um milionário, porque cresceu na Inglaterra, foi do Paquistão para a Inglaterra.
Estudou, como tantos, milhares e milhares de outros.
Estudou na Escócia e sempre quis ser o quê? Quando era pequenino no Paquistão, mais pobre, queria ser sempre um perfeiro cavalheiro inglês. Um perfeito cavalheiro.
Queria ser um gentleman.
Sabes qual era o modelo dele? Era o Simon Temple, interpretado pelo Roger Moore.
Pelo Roger Moore, o santo.
E o carro, ele queria ter um Jaguar igual ao carro.
Era o Aston Martin.
Não, o Aston Martin era do 007. O Aston Martin era 007. Isto era um Jaguar. O perfeito cavalheiro. Maomé, Jesus e James Bond. 3 pessoas que intervieram na formação cultural do Imran Hamad, o perfeito cavalheiro.
E ele depois escreveu um livro a contar a sua própria história.
Como é que um paquistanês cresce no mundo moderno com outro tipo de referências. E, por fim, um português que foi, não à China, mas a um sítio ali não muito longe, que tem fronteira com a China, à Coreia do Norte, José Luís Peixoto, que é essencialmente um romancista e um escritor, dentro do segredo, uma viagem à Coreia do Norte. Do ponto de vista...
Não é romance.
Não é um romance, é uma viagem como se um turista chegasse à Coreia do Norte. O que é que encontra? Por acaso, eu só estive uma vez na Coreia do Norte, estava a ver se ali é um sítio que me recomendaram, que é uma aldeia onde só há anões, mas não, ele foi para outros sítios. José Luís Peixoto dentro do segredo na Quetzal. Por fim, olha, isto aqui já é muito a sério, é uma senhora que pode ter um nome que não nos diz nada, Celina da Piedade, é portuguesa, toca acordeon e toca uma música excepcional em casa, é uma mistura de folk e de outras músicas, e aqui toca uma valsa a 3 tempos, que nós também chamamos fandango. No acordeon com uma guitarra baixo elétrica, uma bateria, um piano, é muito bonito, em casa da Celina da Piedade. Se não conhecias ainda, vai conhecer. É um acordeão diferente, não é um acordeão das feiras, é um acordeão diferente.
Então se pode dizer que recomendamos tanto leitura como música altamente original. Celina da Piedade é a música que está a ouvir e é a música que encerra esta edição da Sociedade das Nações. Voltaremos para a semana que vem.